What is up, everybody? Svenddiesel here. We're going to be tying up the balanced candy. If you got any reference to tying it all, this is a pattern, a variation of the surf candy. We're just making it balanced. So we have an Ahrex FW550 in the vise, size 4. This is some 6/0 wax thread from Semperfli. I'm almost out of this white. It's about time to refill, but we got plenty for this fly. So I'm going to go ahead and start my thread, laying down a nice thread base here on the shank of the hook. That way we'll have something to grip the embroidery pin to. So for this, we're going to be using a number 17 1.25" embroidery pin. We're going to be using a Firehole 3.0 gold. I've tried these with gold and silver this fall and pretty much like the gold a little bit better. Now, when using this small of a bead, we're going to have to extend that bead, that tungsten bead, pretty far out, almost 3 times, meaning you could fit 3 beads in between the bend in the shank and where the bead sits, roughly. I think it's about 3.5 times. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that end off and get this roughly in position. I'll lay down some nice loose, about 3 or 4 wraps along this to secure it. That way I can still move it around. And I know from water testing these, I want it to be just a little bit out beyond that hook eye, just a little space there, which is equivalent of about 3.5 bead spacings. Now each hook, each tungsten bead is going to balance differently, so tie one, test it out. Now to make this a little bit durable, we're going to be putting on some of this super glue. This is Z-cement. I like to use this to bond the thread to the shank, to the embroidery pin, make it one solid unit. Now we're going to extend that embroidery pin out further than I normally do with like my balanced leeches, and so we're going to do a little trick that I've been doing on my balanced leeches, which I think will make this a little durable. So go ahead and go over the super glue with some more thread wraps. It makes it so you can quickly just start tying on it. When you're adding material, if that super glue is still wet, it's going to cause you to get little fluffs all over your fingertips, and etc., etc. It could potentially be messy. So I'll just test that. Not any super glue coming off on my finger. We're good to go. So for this fly, we're going to be using Bucktail. This is a Naturesspirit white, and I'm just going to kind of measure how long the fibers I need, just holding it up, and we're going to take from about the middle section here. I don't know how many fibers we're doing, but roughly a clump. I'd say maybe half a pencil, and then a little trick here. I'm going to pull out some of these nice ones and I'll restack it so we're utilizing most of the bucktail, and then some of these smaller ones I'll just discard. So I just want the good ones, the nice and thick ones, and we're going to be measuring this up. I want it roughly to be a little bit longer than a normal tail, because we're going for a minnow imitation here. And so we're going to do it roughly about 1.5 times the length of the overall hook to 2. And you got to factor in that embroidery pin with the tungsten bead. And I'll just go ahead and secure this right here on the top. I'm going to leave a little spacing between where the hair ends and the tungsten bead, and that's a little bit important later down the road, so just make sure you leave a little spacing there. And I'll just lay down some nice tight wraps now, keeping it all clumped together on the top of the shank, which will be the bottom of the fly, since this is on a jig hook and it's going to ride hook point up. Now I'm going to use my cheater finger there and get that thread there so those butt ends are nice and secure, and then I'll just maybe just go over it one more time, just real quick, lay down some nice tight wraps right there, and then we'll go ahead and whip finish this thread right here behind the tungsten bead, because for this body we're going to be using some tubing. You could do this in a variety of different ways, combinations, materials. For this, we're just using this Dura Flash. This is in kind of a clear, translucent, pearlesque color. I'm trying to see what color it is. Set the package down. It's pearl, so I was right. Now I'm just going to cut off a little strip there that's roughly longer. I'll cut down the seam here, and this is critical to get it on the fly. Just be careful. You don't want to bugger this stuff too much, because if you mess around with it quite a bit, it will come undone. So it's kind of a one-shot deal, maybe 2-shot, and then you got to discard it. So we're just going to thread that on very carefully, and then be mindful of that hook eye. We're just going to slide it over and then let it sit there, and I'm going to restart my thread right there behind the tungsten bead. And this is why we left that gap. I'm going to fill that with a little bit of thread, starting my thread back on, and this will give us room to play around with the head, because the eyes are going to cover this, but I just want to make sure I've got plenty of room. And here's what the trick I've been doing lately. I'm just laying down a little bit of super glue here. This is a gel right there behind to fill our gap, and I think that that is going to cause less bends in the embroidery pin personally, but time will tell. And we're going to go ahead and secure this tubing. Just be careful if you get a few that slip away, that's okay. And then as I get 2 wraps around, I slide it backwards, so we're right there behind that bead. We got a couple strays, the cord, that's okay, because we're going to be covering this in some UV resin. We just want to make sure that we got plenty of gap between that hook eye and the tubing, because I don't want to fill that with the UV resin. So just trim those out, and if you're struggling to get it over it, if you're using a smaller tubing, you can go ahead and put a slit in the tubing, because like I said, we're going to be covering this in some resin, so it's going to be durable. You could also use epoxy, but I've had really good luck with the resin, and I think it's really improves the drying time and all, etc., etc., etc. So go ahead and whip finish that, and you can see we've built up quite a bit of thread there. If you need more thread for your eyes, go ahead and add a little bit more, but this is going to take a really nice shape. I'm going to just trim this just a tad bit more, and then make sure that we're good to go. I got a little kind of the cord right there. I'm just going to pull that off, and then I just kind of fluff this out so it's got a nice little taper here, so the tail is free forming. And we're going to do that to the other side, and then we will make sure we cut out that top cord, because I don't want that. I just want it to be mainly flash coming off of the body. So there is pretty much the fly. You can fish it as is, although it's not going to maybe last too long the way the tubing is sitting now. So let's go ahead and pick our eyes. For this, we're going to use these, I believe it's called Ice. And these are some 4mm Flymen eyes that are in the color of ice. And I'm just going to pull off one of these, and I'm going to put it right there beneath the hook eye and on my thread. And I'll do the same to the other side. And this has some adhesion on the back of this. If you struggle with doing eyes, you could always put down a little bit of super glue or resin and then put them on. But since we have that thread base and the mylar, I'm just going to check them. I think they hold on pretty good, but before I resin the whole body, I'm going to use this Semperfli No Tack UV, and I'm going to put a small dab in between those eyes so that the UV resin is kind of filling that void, and it may creep over the eye just a smidge. That's okay. I'll do the same to the underside, and before you cure this, make sure the eyes are where you want them to be. Once you cure it, it's going to be a process to get them off, and so just make sure they're positioned. Use a good resin so that it stays in place. The adhesion, I don't really depend on it, but these are a pretty good eye for that. So we've got our eyes on, so now I'm just inspecting the body, and we're going to start just by laying down a thin layer of resin. Don't go heavy. If you go heavy, it's going to be a nightmare. But this first layer, we're kind of wanting it to penetrate through the Dura tubing so that it will fill the void. And I'm just kind of spreading it around, just barely squeezing the bottle, just oozing out just a little bit. I mean, this is a size 4. You can see by the hook shank, we're not really putting out a ton of resin. And then I'm going to use the tip here to work it around, cover those eyes, because you don't want to lose those. Spend all this time on the fly, and then next thing you know, you don't have eyes. I think the eyes are kind of critical for these candy flies, and so I'm just going to work that around, stretch the tubing so that we can really kind of work that resin in between the layers, and we've pretty much filled it now, and got a really nice coating on it. It's nice and even. I don't have any drips, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull the tail, the tubing kind of how I want it positioned, which is usually straight back, and then I'll go ahead and cure it up just using my UV light. As soon as this light hits it, it's going to set that tubing where you want it. And at this point, we can't change that without doing some serious demolition work. And then I like to do a second layer on these, because I think the first layer kind of goes into the tubing and up against that bucktail. And so I'm just really even going maybe a quarter squeeze that I was doing before, just really kind of just spreading that resin around. If you have excess, the reason I'm not going well into past the bend, I can kind of push the excess into the tail more. But if you put way too much, just go ahead and grab a paper towel or let it drip onto your table if you got a glass table, or put down a paper so it doesn't ruin anything. But you just want to make sure you got a good resin. I really love this Semperfli No Tack UV, just because it shapes really well and it has a no tack. This is going to cure really solid 15-20 seconds, and we are off the vise. If you're doing epoxy, you'd have to put it in a drying wheel, and that could be a process. So let's go ahead and water test this, see how it looks in the water. Bomb proof. You can see how you have to really extend out that tungsten bead to get it to sit balanced in the water. Notice how using the jig hook it flips back up. Oh, that's crazy. It's staring at us. So tie some up in your favorite colors, fish them. Thanks for watching. Click subscribe.